Hey Algebra 1, and thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be looking at lesson 11.5, choosing a data display, and this is 11.5 part 1. We're just going to be looking at a lot of informational pieces about data displays, so it's going to seem like you're writing a lot, hence the 14 things, but it's super simple, and all you've got to do is just make sure that you understand each of the data displays and what kind of data it is. The first thing we're going to talk about is the difference between qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is normally just in categories or labels, and they don't have number entries. They can be separated into different categories, and when we use qualitative data, such as adding or finding a mean, we don't need qualitative data to do that because we just want numbers for that. On the other hand, we have quantitative data, and the way I like to remember this is quantitative has an N in it, and N stands for numbers. And that does consist of numbers that represents counts or measurements. If the numbers don't represent counts or measurements, then it would not be considered quantitative data. Let's go ahead and take time now to pause here so you can write down number 1, and once you're done, click play so you can try number 2. So number 2, you're just going to determine if the data is qualitative or quantitative. Remember, qualitative is just labeling or categorizing, and quantitative actually uses numbers to make counts or measurements. Let's go ahead and pause here so you can try these, and once you're done, click play. So for the first one, this one is going to be considered quantitative data because it's using prices. For letter B, this one was kind of tricky because when you talk about numbers, you automatically think quantitative, but jersey numbers just label the basketball players, so this one would actually be qualitative. The lengths of song played at a concert, those are going to be quantitative. And then the last one, zodiac signs of students in your class, that one would be qualitative. Okay, so just make sure, I know B was maybe kind of tricky, but that one should be qualitative because it's labeling the types of players. Like, so if you see the number such and such, you know that that's that person playing. Then this next slide is just going to go over ways to display data. So again, I'm going to go through the slide, pause it as you need to, but these are just different types of displays that you're going to see later on. Bar graphs are going to compare amounts, and if you want to draw the shapes or draw the icons with them, you can. Circle graphs shows data as parts of a whole. It's also a good way to compare data. Stem and leaf plots, similar to box and whisker plots, it shows how each of the data is distributed. So this would be comparable to box and whisker, which is what we just learned. Line plots, they show each value and how the lines are distributed. A line graph just shows how amounts change over time. So if you're talking about the progression of time, you want to use a line graph specifically for that. And then histograms, those show frequencies of data and intervals of the same size. So if you wanted to find like the intervals of ages 5 through 8, and then 9 through 12, and 13 through 15 who watch certain shows, that histogram would be perfect for that. If you need to, go back and rewind to just make sure you have all of these 3 through 8 on your paper, or you can pause it right now and go ahead and write down, but once you're done, let's go ahead and click play so you can see what happens next. So for 9 and 10, you're going to look at the data and then figure out what display would be best used to represent these data, or the sets of data. So let's go ahead and pause here and try 9 and 10, and once you're done, click play to check your work. So for number 9, we would want to use a circle graph because it's going to show parts of a whole. It's going to show maybe how much percent or how many people actually have brown, blue, hazel, green, gray, or amber eyes. For number 10, we would probably want to use the box and whisker or a stem and leaf plot because it would show the distribution of data or the distribution of numbers. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about, and this is the final 4 things that are going on our notes, of how graphs may be misleading. So there are 4 ways that a graph could be misleading. One way is that an axis is broken or numbers left off an axis, and this is what the broken axis looks like. It might be a good idea to write down or draw what the broken axis looks like. But this is one way that a graph could be misleading. If you need to, let's go ahead and pause here so you can finish writing down number 11, and once you're done, click play to see number 12. Next up, we have another way that it could be misleading. The intervals on the axis are not the same length. And again, this one's kind of pretty simple. You skip a whole big section and just have 18,000, 27,000, 36,000. Let's go ahead and pause here so you can write down and maybe even draw what different intervals look like. And once you're done, click play to see 13. Now 13, this one is compressed so much so that the difference is really hard to see. In other words, if your section is only between 5 and 5.04, you probably should have made a lot more clear intervals. So let's go ahead and pause here again so you can write down how it's misleading and maybe even draw how they're misleading. The last way something could be misleading graph is when there are pictures being used and it's distorting the data. So like if you have trucks that are much larger than the cars, it's going to look like you might have more trucks at first. So just make sure whenever you use pictures, you're using the same size. Let's go ahead and pause here and draw the graph so you can see the different types of what it's supposed to look like. And once you're done, click play. That's going to conclude our notes for today. Thanks so much for tuning in on part 1 of 11.5, choosing a data display, and we'll catch you next time.